thank you very much for joining us this morning. It's delightful to have you here to discuss, obviously, the topic that is on everyone's lips, like I mentioned earlier. It's artificial intelligence. So let me start this conversation by turning to you, Professor Acemoglu. As you state in your recent book titled Power and Progress, progress is not automatic, but depends on the choices we make about technology. So what, in your opinion, are the best choices we can make today about AI that will lead us to a better and hopefully more equal society?
Well, thank you, Charlotte. You know, there is no doubt that AI is going to affect many aspects of our lives, and it's here to stay. So we better make the best of it. And part of the reason why actually I wrote the book you mentioned is because I think that the trajectory of AI, both among entrepreneurs and policymakers, is being shaped by a kind of a blind techno-optimism that because it's an impressive technology, because it's going to be an advance, everything is going to work out. And the book essentially argues that if you look at history, that's not what you learn. Sometimes people say, oh, things have worked out in the past. But if you look at history, what you see is that when technology is controlled by a small elite and it's used for marginalizing and sidelining humans, you get much more inequality, threats to institutions, and you don't even get the productivity benefits that you want. And for example, you see the first stage of the British Industrial Revolution, it impoverished a lot of people. Now we remember the Industrial Revolution as a happy outcome, and indeed it is, because in the second phase we started using technology in a way that increased worker productivity. And I think it's the same thing with AI. AI is an information technology. It has the capacity to provide better information to workers. It has therefore the capacity to empower us, to make us more informed, better problem solvers, better decision makers, and also better citizens. But we can also use it for exactly the opposite. As an information technology, it can be used for manipulation, for sidelining humans, for misinformation, extremism, and all kinds of ways in which it's not going to help the great majority of the people. So those are the choices ahead of us.
Well, that's a rather sobering note to start this conversation. Dr. Aurélie Jean, based on your experience with clients, how long will it take to see this full-scale implementation of AI across the economy? I discussed it with Maurice Lévy. And which sectors will be most impacted by this disruption? Health, for instance?
Yeah, so obviously it's very difficult to answer that question. It depends on the industry, it depends on the company, the culture, the country, and the people you can hire, obviously. But I would say to really be able to use AI in the right way and to avoid threats, it's really important to be able to develop technology that you can scale and not being stuck at the POC, at the proof of concept level, which happens a lot in companies, I have to say, so they spend money for nothing, literally. And I would say, to make sure that you develop correctly those technology, you have to really adopt, deploy, an algorithmic governance, so a set of practices, best practices, code of conduct on how you develop those technologies, how you test those technologies, and how you provide the end user with information, relevant information on that technology. And I would say, in the field in which I'm working on, which is healthcare, I mean medical application, early detection of breast cancer, I realized that there are 3 subfields on which every industry will evolve quickly. It's the predictive, the precision, and the personalized. So, for instance, in healthcare and medical application, it's the predictive medicine, the personalized medicine, and precision medicine. And this is actually, you can apply this to every single field. In the finance industry, in education, environment, it's literally, you can apply this to every single field.
Thank you very much. Daron Acemoglu, you've said in the past that technology should be used not to replace people, but rather to elevate and empower them by providing better tools, information, and organization. So what can be done to support workers in this new era and forestall further increases in inequality?
Yeah, I think part of the problem right now with the tech sector in the United States and with the trajectory of AI is that there is an excessive focus on using these tools for automation, and there's an excessive focus on monetizing user data in various different ways, such as digital advertising. But it follows from what I said a second ago, that AI is an information technology, that it actually has very promising applications in making workers more capable, more expert, more informed about the things that they're doing. Automation is not wrong. automation has been with us for at least 250 years, and it will be with us. Nobody wants to go back to the times when instead of cranes or excavators, we use shovels. But excessive automation is not going to help workers, and it's not going to help productivity. Instead, what we can do with AI is upskill work, exactly like you said, because we can use it as an informational tool for increasing the reach of workers. Look, today, most of the workers in the economy, even those involved in blue-collar work, are engaged in a series of problem-solving tasks. If you're an electrician, what you have to do is find a problem, troubleshoot, develop a solution, and oftentimes you're dealing with very complex problems, things you haven't encountered before. If we make a transition to the electricity grid, that's going to become even deeper. So what can we do? We can train better electricians, but more importantly, an informational tool means that you can provide people real-time information for helping them diagnose the problems and develop solutions. The irony of our current age is that information is abundant. Everything you want and a lot of things you don't want are on the internet, but useful information is scarce. When you, as an electrician, you need to know something about what's wrong, you're not going to know that. So AI has the capacity to do that, and that's the way to complement humans in a way that's also going to be both good for productivity, reducing inequality or at least limiting inequality, and at the same time actually put a limit to what automation is doing. Because if we just automate and automate, then ultimately it's going to be really bad for workers, and ultimately it's going to really sideline humans. It's not consistent with empowering a better, meaningful life with humans.
So, Aurélie Jean, given the risks of misuse, given the risks to the value of human input and labor, what are your thoughts on the role of regulation on artificial intelligence? And do you see many differences between the EU and the US approach?
So obviously we tend to say that Europe is regulating and the United States are innovating, but I think it's a wrong way of seeing things, because, remember in Europe we developed the GDPR, which by the way influenced strongly and deeply the American, the CCPA that was first in California, then in I think it's 15 or 17 states in the US, and hopefully one day federal act. But so it's not as simple. Now that being said, the AI Act that was voted like a year ago in the European Commission and that will be deployed, I think in 2025 or 2026, is a good thing. So in other words, do we need a regulation on AI? Yes, we need, because we need to make sure that we protect the fundamental rights. We need to protect workers, and I think the AI Act is not focusing enough on workers, but this is my view. Not also on the environment, but we should talk more about that. But then it's a matter of how do we write that act? And I felt that the AI Act, that is an amazing decision, and that is a framework that we're going to see how it's going to be applied, on very specific use case in Europe. It's a framework, but obviously I saw that the text was a little bit more conservative than the GDPR. That was a bit more liberal. So, and especially on making the difference between research and industrial deployment of use case. And I say that because we have to make sure that in research we still develop, we still work on technologies, applications to understand, to avoid threats, to provide solutions, concrete solutions, etc., etc. And in the AI Act, they don't make the distinction as much as strong as it is in the GDPR. So we have to make sure to protect fundamental rights as well as to encourage innovation. And again, I think because you were talking about workers, AI Act to me is not protecting enough workers.
So Daron Acemoglu, you mentioned earlier that AI is already used very much for automating many functions. So going back to how corporates, organizations are going to implement AI, how will they adapt to this new paradigm where AI is integrated into every function, and how long, there again, will it take for it to happen?
I think there are very, very important issues here. One of them is absolutely AI is going to influence every process in organizations in the same way that the internet does. But we don't think that because the internet influences every aspect of information and process within an organization, we should give up on workers. And I think the key decision for CEOs and business executives is going to be how to use AI with your workers, with your human resources. And here I think what I would say is, it's going to make a real difference whether you view labor as a cost to be cut or as an important resource that's going to contribute to the success of your company. If you do the former, if you believe the former, then you're going to automate, or at least you're going to try, which might fail, by the way. But if you think it's a really important human resource, then you have every incentive to demand and implement the technologies, the informational technologies, that's going to give better reach, better information, better problem-solving capabilities to your workers. And that's really important. And you know what a threat for this is? I think, first of all, ideology. You know, if we believe that all we have to do is shareholder values, that's a threat. Another ideology, if we believe that we are heading towards artificial general intelligence, that's a threat, because if we're really going to artificial general intelligence, it's going to become cleverer than us, then why do we need the workers? Why do we need to invest in the workers? And then another threat is the hype. If we think AI is going so fast and it's going to revolutionize everything tomorrow, then we're going to immediately try to implement it in a way that's not ready yet. And a lot of that implementation will be automation and excessive automation that sort of displaces workers, but doesn't even actually deliver the productivity gains, because if you automate things that workers were actually quite good at and AI is not ready for, you're going to get a productivity decline, not a productivity gain. So a lot hinges on the approaches, the overall strategy, and the views of the CEOs for the next several years, several decades.
Aurélie Jean, it's not that AI as a technology is intrinsically good or bad, but it's a reflection on human psyche, our behavior, our thoughts. And that's what's dangerous, because humans can transmit their own cognitive biases to algorithms and models they develop, and these can be passed on to digital tools and models. So how can we prevent that from happening there again?
That's one of the big challenges, by the way, today with AI. You know, it's technology discrimination, environment, and digital labor. It's not the human extinction or whatever. This is bullshit, to refer to what Maurice Lévy was saying, BS.
Yes.
So it's very technology discrimination. Obviously, we have cognitive biases, and we transfer those biases to the technology that we develop as well as we use, because we are training, calibrating, testing our algorithm on data set that we collect from real life, you know, in real conditions. So we as people, you know, we have cognitive biases, and we cannot remove our cognitive biases just like that. What we need to do, it's what I was referring to at the beginning, which is what I call the algorithmic governance, meaning that we have to make sure that we have a set of good and best practices on how we develop the algorithm, how we collect, how we decide on which data to collect. You know, how are we going to collect this data? Are we going to test this data? How are we going to do it? Some sampling or other things. There are so many methods. Or how we're going to test the algorithm once it's calibrated and trained, and how do we deploy the algorithm, which information we provide the end user with, etc., etc. And also from the beginning is how do we challenge and formulate the problem we want to solve, because you might be surprised, but depending on whether you're the scientist, engineer, or you are the talent from the business, you don't have the same way of explaining the problem to solve or the question to answer. And you have to start with that, you know, the basics. Everything together, the algorithmic governance is key. And there is one field that is pretty old now, but we don't really talk publicly a lot about it. It's what we call explainability AI. It's from statistics, it's mathematics, nothing fancy first, and based on game theory. And the idea is to how we can actually extract, you know, the logic, the underlying logic of the algorithm once it's trained based on statistics, or how do we do that at the data level once we collect the data set, etc. And this is a way to actually detect any technology discrimination, any algorithmic bias. So just to give you an example, the first facial recognition algorithm in 2015, something like that, you know, were not recognizing people of color, because the data set that was providing to the algorithm was actually comprised of only white people. Why? Because the people who were conceiving and owning, you know, this technology were white. So I don't blame the developers. I blame the system, where we have to by law, we have to test a technology before we deploy it publicly. And believe me or not, but before the AI Act, it was not mandatory.
But you've just raised a very important point, and I've got to ask you, when you say we need to do this, we need to consider that, who's we?
It's all the owners of the technology, the developers, the scientists, the engineers, as well as the users. Because even though you develop very well an algorithmic technology and you provide the end user with the right information, the end user might use that technology for wrong purposes. So we is everyone, and obviously economic and state leaders as well, because they have to build the right regulation to protect fundamental rights, but as well to encourage the innovation, which is very important because AI can provide so many opportunities, amazing opportunities. Healthcare is one, finance, to make it more transparent, etc., etc.
In a very volatile geopolitical context, we discussed it at length yesterday, AI could be misused in politics to influence debate and to spread misinformation, of course. So there again, how can we ensure that AI doesn't become a tool for bad political purposes?
Well, actually, I mean, this is a fundamentally important question. But before I actually answer your question, I want to comment on one thing that Aurélie said, because it's actually related to the answer, and it's a very important issue. Explainability is key. So I advocated earlier on, I said you want to use AI as an information tool for workers so that they can make better decisions. But unless you make AI explainable, or if you keep on the current black box, that's impossible. Because AI is going to make some recommendation to you, but you won't understand why it's making that recommendation, how to combine it with your own expertise and information. So explainability is key for making AI useful for workers. But explainability is also part of the problem of avoiding manipulation. So the best place so far in terms of regulations on manipulation is actually Taiwan. And one of the things that Taiwan has done is it has introduced a system where all kinds of information have to be traced to their origin through a digital signature. So this is a first step in understanding, where the manipulative information comes from, and then you can sort of investigate it. Why was this information actually put into this system? So it's part of a broader explainability agenda, and I think that's going to be very important. And this question of AI and democracy, why it's partly so important is because a second ago I said there's good AI and bad AI, and I indicated, my belief is we're heading in the bad AI direction with the very oligopolistic structure in the tech industry, more manipulation, more automation, more control of data. So we need a redirection of technology. Where is that going to come from? It's going to come from democracy. So democratic control of technologies is always a very important thing. But at the same time, AI is making democracy harder, or at least there's a danger that it could make democracy harder, in the same way that social media has discouraged citizenship, has created more polarization or make more echo chambers. I think AI has much greater capabilities if we misuse it. So that's why your question is so central. We need to have the right regulatory incentive, but also we need to have the right norms. Regulation is nothing without norms. So norms in the industry have to start changing, which again is a democratic process.
We are running out of time, sadly. But before you go, I wanted to ask you one more question, is to share maybe your key message for the global CEOs, executives that they are thinking of implementing AI. How should they go about it? And maybe what are the right questions they should ask themselves?
So obviously, in addition to have the right algorithmic governance, which is still on an ongoing process, I would tell one thing to the CEOs and chairmen of corporates and companies, whatever the sizes, it's to invite to have chief data officer or chief science officer or chief AI officer at the executive committee level, which is not the case today, not in all companies. And I say that because they have a vision. You have to challenge them. It has to go up to the executive committee and to have the right conversation with the right people at the right time, because it's key, it's a challenge today at every level, in HR, in marketing, in sales. So we have to have this conversation at the executive level, executive committee level, with the right people, chief data, chief AI, chief science officer, which they are not at the executive level, committee level today.
So I'll end with one idea about regular business executives and one for tech executives. For regular business tech executives, I think it's what I said a second ago. You have to first question which are the functions and which are the workers that can most benefit from better information, and then use AI as an informational tool. That doesn't mean don't use it for automation, but first of all, it's an informational tool to help your workers. And that change has to come first by a transformation of the norms in corporations, really prioritize workers, and then getting more information about how it is that workers can contribute more to the organization. For tech executives, I think it's also a change in norms. I think in tech, especially because of lack of regulation and the culture of Silicon Valley, a general attitude of break things first and then perhaps you can fix them has emerged. And that norm has to change. Like, today in the physics world, it would be inconceivable that you can say, oh, I'm a physicist, so therefore I don't care about whether I work on nuclear weapons. There are norms about whether you can work on nuclear weapons, whether you can share that information with potential malicious actors or in contradiction with the non-proliferation norms. So in the tech world also, I think we need better norms of people saying, I'm making advances, but what are these advances going to be used for, and how can I make sure that it's for the better common good, for social objectives, for something that's going to actually bolster our democratic institutions? I think that's very important.
There are many Oppenheimers out there. Thank you so much. We promised you a fascinating discussion. I think we delivered this morning. Thank you so much to our guests, Professor Daron Acemoglu and Dr. Aurélie Jean. Thank you.